Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Non-Dilutive Funding with Sedale Turbovsky. My name is Colin Mahan, and I'm a program manager at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the Nasdaq Center is a nonprofit that's building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. As you just have seen in the chat, the Nasdaq Center, along with our partner Mentor Cloud, launched a free mentor matching platform for entrepreneurs called Mentor Makers. You can create your own advisory board to guide and inspire you with in-the-moment mentorship from topic experts and professionals dedicated to providing exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So find or become a mentor today by using that link in the chat. Mentorship matters to all entrepreneurs. Their success is dependent on it. Quick housekeeping, and there was a question in the chat about this. We're going to open up for a live Q&A at the end of the event, so please submit your questions for us in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. Now, none of what we do here at the center could be possible without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including Nasdaq, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, BPM, and HubSpot. We're humbled and grateful for their contributions. Now, during these still unique times, we're curious on how sentiment is among the entrepreneurs that we work with. So I'm going to start us off by just launching a quick poll to just let us know how you're feeling about your business right now. Are you optimistic? Are you in survival mode? Where are you at? Thank you for participating in. These help us understand what sort of wellness resources we should be providing to our entrepreneurs and just getting a nice pulse on how we're doing on this Friday. All righty. I'm going to end this poll and share these results with you all. So it looks like optimism is the leader on a sunny Friday, but some anxiousness and a little bit of survival mode out there. So hopefully this presentation will help alleviate some of those sentiments. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest in the chat. Sedale Turbovsky is the CEO and co-founder of OpenGrants, and this is his third time on the platform. Sedale, so happy to have you back.
It's a pleasure to be here. Super excited to dive in and share what hopefully will be some useful tips and insights into the world of grant funding. So excited.
I love it. Well, over to you. I'm looking forward to learning more.
All right. I'm just going to bring up my presentation here. And yeah, really excited to be back here at the Entrepreneurial Center and excited to share a bit about grant funding. My name is Sedale Turbovsky. I'm the CEO and co-founder of OpenGrants. And we are a firm that is focused on streamlining access to grant funding. In my previous careers, I founded a few other venture-backed companies. This is my fourth. But before that, I worked at a firm where we managed about a $5 billion portfolio of grant-funded projects. And we were very lucky to have a lot of success. We had about a 99.9% success rate raising and securing funding for our clients. And so we got very good at grant writing. And so I'm super excited to share a little bit about that with y'all. I want to start with some level setting here to say that, grant funding, and the reason it's so exciting and the reason I love grant funding is because it's the kind of altruistic, impact-focused capital that we need to solve a lot of the world's problems. Grant funding is unique because it's non-dilutive, meaning you don't give up ownership of your company or your venture. It doesn't require repayment. And the point of grant funding is to accomplish something. And whether that's researching the next generation of aircraft or developing a really interesting drug or simply, housing the homeless, and none of these things are simple, right? But, there's kind of research and development, technical applications, as well as kind of social and impact-focused applications for grant funding. But it is underutilized. There's about $2 trillion of it that moves around the globe every year. And it's really underutilized because it's kind of a hard resource to come by because it is so time-consuming. The management process is difficult. It can be kind of expensive to apply just because you might be paying expensive consultants, and it can be a bit frustrating. And so my goal here today is to talk to you about some of the incredible resources, but often deeply underutilized resources that exist out there to allow you to secure grant funding for your venture, whether that be a startup or just a Main Street business, a lifestyle business, or a nonprofit. So I want to start by just showing you the ecosystem of where you can find these grant funds, because they are all over, but frequently one of the first things we see people struggle with is like, they say, okay, I don't know where to find grant funding, or there's definitely no grant funding for my business. And to that, I say, you're probably asking the wrong question about, when you go search, you're probably asking the wrong question. So here's a look at the ecosystem, the landscape of grant funding resources out there. There is the famous grants.gov. That's a lot of the federal funding resources out there. There is California's grants.gov. If you happen to be located in the state of California, California has its own grants.gov just for the state of California, which is useful. There's tools like Instrumental that are great for foundations and nonprofits. There's tools like Candid and Foundation Center, which I don't have on here, unfortunately, but I meant to include them. There is the SBIR and Sdtr website. There's tools like GrantStation, BetaSam, and obviously I'm biased, but OpenGrants I think is one of the best ones. And it is a free place. You can go and you can look for grant funding for your organization. But just having the information in front of you doesn't mean that it's super easy to find the grant funding. And something that I think is a big unlock that we've found in going out and looking for grant funding is it's much better to be able to ask a question like, can I get grant funding for the charging stations that I want to put in front of my business, rather than can I get grant funding for my business? And the reason for that is grant funding typically, as I mentioned earlier, it's about an impact or a change or something that you're working on. And so it's not super useful as someone searching for grant funding to say, can I get funding for my business? Because the answer is probably yes. OpenGrants, we use grant funding all the time. We have grant funding that we've used to train employees. We've had grant funding that we've used to pay for software development. We have grant funding that we've used to subsidize the cost of some of the services we deliver through our marketplace. There's a lot of ways to use it. And so as you are thinking about embarking on this search for funding, the first challenge or the first thing I'll throw out there that will really help you is get really specific. Figure out, like, instead of asking, can I get grant funding for my business, look at the things you need to pay for and ask a question about that. So can I get grant funding to do, upgrade my point of sale system? Can I get grant funding to research, the impact of the therapy that I'm pioneering? Whatever it is that you might be working on, ask specifically about how can I get funding for this specific thing. That'll really help you unlock. And then you can use any of these tools, and then I'll just throw out there, of course, like Google, right? You can use any of these tools to make that inquiry, and then use that same line of questioning with your advisors, with investors, with other people who might know this space, so that you can quickly and efficiently locate those funding opportunities that are relevant for the things that you need. And all of those examples that I just gave are real. Like there's all kinds of grant funding out there. So I just wanted to start with that. I think maybe a first note is, get real specific about the kind of funding that you're looking for, because that's going to unlock this search process. All of these tools are great, but they're only good when you're asking the right questions, unfortunately. And OpenGrants is kind of working on transforming how that happens, but currently that's the way to do it. So you want to get really clear about the question that you're asking. We get asked all the time, like, what is the process? And this is like kind of the first, I'm going to show you two different kind of frameworks here for how to be successful with grant funding. And then we're going to do a deeper dive on one of the really important salient points that I think is building relationships with funders, because I think that that's something that is often lacking. And as an entrepreneur, if you can do that really well, not only will you be able to raise capital, and including grant funding and other kinds of capital, but you'll really unlock some real strategic advantages for yourself down the road. And I think it's something that certainly served me well. As I mentioned, this is my fourth venture-backed startup. I've had the great opportunity and privilege to work with some incredible investors and mentors along the way. And the upshot of all of that is that we were able to develop these frameworks and get really good at securing grant funding. So the first part of being really successful with getting funding in the door as an entrepreneur is going to be understanding the people and the funding opportunities that are out there. So that search part is just part of it, right? So you find a couple opportunities, and then you're going to want to understand, all right, well, why do these opportunities exist? So if you go out and you find, I'll just use that as an example, you find a grant to put charging stations in front of your business downtown, you want to do a little more research and understand, why does this opportunity exist? What is it that the funder is trying to achieve with this funding? And it goes beyond like they want to put charging stations in, which is usually like that's a means to an end. It's not like the end all of their mission. So you'll find like frequently, oh, they want to put charging stations in because they want to reduce emissions. They want the air to be cleaner, or they want to put charging stations in because they want more foot traffic, because they want more vehicles coming down to this downtown area that's maybe not utilized as much as they'd like it to be. So start to understand those motivations behind your funder. And doing your research also involves kind of understanding what it is that is driving the individuals who are at the wheel of these grant funding programs. So there's kind of the macro of like, all right, what's the organization trying to achieve? And then you want to do some additional research. If you're going to be really effective, you want to know like, what is this person who is writing this check trying to achieve? Because you can help them out. A lot of this goes to, you want to break down the facade of like you working with an organization, and you want to really get to the heart of the matter, which is you working with an individual who also has goals. And so, as many of you, I think as anyone can sympathize with, the people who are granting money, they have bosses, they have OKRs, they have things that they're trying to achieve in their careers. They have things they're trying to achieve for the quarter, maybe. Like there's a lot of things at play, and the more you can align yourself with the strategic goals, not only of the organization itself, but of the people who are deploying the grant money, to the extent you can do that, you're going to be way more effective as an applicant, and you're going to really improve your rate of acceptance in terms of securing grant funding. And so, people ask all the time, well, like, all right, well, you had a 99.9% success rate applying for grants. How do you do that? This is like the foundation for everything else, is understanding that research. So there's a lot of ways to go about understanding that, but a lot of it has to do with just asking the questions, getting in there and showing up, providing value, on the front end of the relationship. So showing up and saying, how can I help? This is a really great way to provide that initial connection and start to understand not only what the organization is trying to achieve, but also what that human person who is looking to deploy grant funding is trying to achieve. So that's the first part of the process. To get really good at securing grant funding, you want to do that research, build that foundation. And then the next step is to really follow the rules. Now, this one puts you on the level with everyone else who knows how to read and follow the rules. And it sounds really simple, but we see it happen all the time where people just don't follow the rules and they get disqualified. So something to be aware of is, any of these grantors, especially for big competitive programs that are out there, they're looking at, maybe hundreds or thousands of applications at any given time, and they're trying to narrow them down, to 10 maybe. So you really want to they're going to use the rules as a way to just discard things right away. And that's going to be something that you're going to want to nail, because otherwise they're just going to throw your idea out no matter how good it is. And you'll see in RFPs, people who put out grant solicitations for applications will always say oh, we reserve the right to make a judgment call even if you don't follow the rules. But the reality of it is that the reviewers, they don't have an incentive to make that judgment call. They have an incentive to scrape off everything possible and get to the 4 or 5 or the 10 that they really want to evaluate. So follow the rules. And this means reading through that RFP that comes out. So typically when you're looking for grants, there'll be some kind of solicitation published that says, hey, come apply for this grant. And with that solicitation, sometimes, especially with the government, you're going to get a 40 or 80 page PDF that you need to read through. And that's going to have all the rules in it. And the rules can be as specific as the kinds of fonts they want to see and the margins, the ability to include images or not include images, links or no links, that kind of thing. So they're very specific. And so you want to get a good idea of all the rules. You want to understand the scoring system, how they're going to evaluate your application. But all of this, like I said, just puts you on the same level as everyone else who follows the rules. And where you start to pull away from the pack and differentiate yourself is really around that first point that I made of being, doing your research, and this last point of being a partner. But I just wanted to point that out, that following the rules puts you on the same level as everyone else, but it's definitely something you want to make sure you do, and you want to be very thorough because there's a lot of stuff to follow. The next step here is really about kind of optimizing your communication and your communication style. Something that folks don't realize when they're applying for grants frequently is that the people reviewing your grant are not subject matter experts. They don't understand your industry. Frequently, they are civil servants or activists or people who just work at the foundation. On the government side, they're civil servants who are working their way up through a career in civil service. And so they are, generally speaking, really unqualified to make technical evaluations of your proposal. Well, the upshot of that is that you need to use the clearest, most concise language possible. You need to speak in a way that's very basic, avoid any kind of jargon, acronyms. You want to avoid all that stuff. And there's obviously exceptions to this rule, and there's programs that are deeply technical where you can get more technical, or you should be more technical. But as a general rule, you want to be very clear and concise. Obviously, you want to be honest. And then the other thing you want to do is tell stories that make human connections. So we talk about the idea of sort of literary kind of like devices that allow you to, motivate human beings to read your proposal. Because once again, these folks, they're looking through a lot of these. And so if you can make something that's fun to read, oh my goodness, that just like pulls you way ahead of the pack and gets you out in front of all your competitors. So, using things like the hero's journey and other tools, recognizable motifs and devices in your communication to the extent that it's allowed, can really set you apart from other people who might not be doing that. So being real, once again, doubling down on that human connection. Ideally, you're getting to that like personal level with those reviewers. And finally, being a good partner. And this is the other thing that's just going to set you way, apart from everyone else. And even though it's number 4 on this list, this starts at the beginning when you're doing your research. And so I want to circle back to something I said earlier, which is, when you're broaching like so you've gone and found the grant that you want to get. The next thing that you should do is figure out who is offering this grant and what their contact information is, and reach out to them and ask. You might start by saying, hey, how can we be helpful? And the next thing you might say is, hey, we're doing this. Do you think it's a good fit for your program? And the next question after that might be, hey, we're doing this. It seems like a really good fit for your program. What can we do to help you achieve your kind of programmatic goals? Like, what could we include? What are you looking for? Being a good partner is, inclusive of the relationship over time, and not just about this transaction of securing a grant. And the ideal here is that you become a partner with your grantor way before you ask them for funding, because the difference is similar to a cold call versus a warm lead, right? So in sales, you talk a lot about like cold calling people and how ineffective that is, and how much better it is to have warm leads who are ready to learn from you or ready to buy your product, whatever it might be. And that's the same thing that's the same relationship you want to develop with that grantor, is that you want to be able to call them up and be like, hey, it's us. We've done all this stuff together in the past. We'd love to use this grant money that you just offered to the world to accomplish something really cool. By the way, it supports all of your strategic goals. And, we've been here since the beginning, so we hope you'll consider it. And that conversation just goes so much better, of course, than just showing up and be like, hey, we'd like money. So you want to be that partner. You want to offer all of that value up front. And this goes back to the researching part and searching for grants. So, say you're out there and you're looking for grants and you want to go apply. You might think about, instead of applying for the current funding cycle, you might think about waiting and engaging with that funder over time. And I know sometimes that the time is an issue, but grant funding really is it's strategic capital. It's aimed at doing very specific things. And so to optimize your process, you might want to wait. Or you might want to submit an application, and even if you get rejected, you could resubmit and then spend that time in between the two applications just building that relationship, being that partner. That will really set you apart from the crowd, and really improve the outcome. So I'm going to go a step further in this process and talk a little bit more about some of the values behind building these relationships, and then I want to dive into like the building of the relationships themselves, and some really practical resources that you can use to build those relationships. And then we'll open it up for Q&A. So the first kind of like value behind this process of building these relationships with grantors is the idea of having like really significant kind of empathy for where they are and what they're trying to achieve. The magic of grant writing and communicating a really successful grant application is really deeply aligning your values with theirs. And as I said before, it's not just like aligning your objectives with that organization's objectives, but aligning your values with the person who is approving those checks. Like, figure out who that person is and unlock that person. Start to understand, like, all right, well, what do we need to do to make you look really brilliant in front of your boss? Because grant funding is unique for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons that it's really unique too is that this isn't like an investor who it's their money, right? Like, investors, when they're putting money into your, like a VC, when they're putting money into your company, it's theirs, or it's their LP's money. Like, they're responsible for it. And if something bad happens to it, they're on the line. With grants, it's less about that, because they're pretty divorced from the money. The money is, it was either donated or it's tax dollars. And while this may or may not be a good thing, and we can talk about that at a different time, they're really divorced from like the idea of like attachment to the money itself. They're interested in the impacts that you're doing and the things that you're working on. And so it's less about the money. It's more about achieving the end goal, and having a deep amount, like a real empathy for that person and the position they're in, will help you understand how to tell a story that resonates and that drives them to fund you. And it's just clutch. So learning how to develop empathy and be deeply kind of aligned values-wise with the people who are behind the funding is really important. The next thing that I want to bring up is the idea of authenticity and being authentic in your approach to funders. And the reason I bring this up is I get this question all the time from people who say, hey, we have a bunch of ideas. Can you go find us a grant, and then we'll strategize around the idea that we want to pitch them? I'm always like, that's a terrible idea. This is not the right way to approach funding. And the reason for that is, no matter what you're working on, in most cases, there's funding for the thing that you're doing, especially, in the impact space, also in the research space. There's people who are jazzed about all kinds of stuff, and everyone's got their thing. And so chances are, if you're doing something, there's some people who are really into it, and people with money who are really into it. So there's no need to go out and try to shoehorn your idea into a funding program that doesn't make any sense for your company. And the problem with that is that you might be successful, and that's the nightmare situation. Because if you're successful in getting funding from someone, but you are not actually aligned with their values or the things they're trying to achieve, but you thought somewhere along in your brain, you're like, I need some money, and so I'll try to get it from this person who's not a great fit, but we'll just like tell them that we're a great fit. And if you slip by and you get funded, all of a sudden you're in a relationship for 3 to 5 years in many cases with someone who you don't share values with someone who is not super excited about what you're building, because as it turns out, you're like only tangentially impacting the thing they wanted to fund. And it's just generally a bad situation. So to really optimize outcomes and do all the things I talked about being a good partner, you want to be really authentic in your approach. And I would say and venture a guess that there's many times people have come to me and said this, and ultimately we just drill down to like, all right, what are the things you're trying to achieve at your company? Let's go find grant funding for that. And usually we can do it. So I just want to throw that out there and say that is like really core. You don't want to try to like get something by someone, or go at it like a weird angle. Just hit it head on. Like, whatever you're working on, there's some people who want to fund it, generally speaking, and you can go get those grants. And so you've got the empathy, authenticity. The next thing here is all about just performance and this is back to being kind of real and honest, right? So one of the things that happens all the time in grant funding is, especially when they're asking you, like in your application, they will ask, like, what have you done in the past that has made you successful, or with grant funding? They specifically want to know, how have you performed as a grant recipient in the past? And this can be problematic for people, of course, who don't have experience, right? And it's like that famous chicken and the egg thing, right? Like, how am I going to get a job that requires experience if I don't have a job where I can get that experience. And there's a great unlock for this that I talk about all the time, which is go partner with someone who has experience, and then you get experience, but they're like the lead applicant. But then you can next time go say, all right, well, I have experience now too. And I just want to touch on that really briefly. One of the sort of like classic combinations is, you're a startup, you've built something incredible, it's super innovative and new to the industry, and you're a perfect shoe-in for a grant, but the grant requires like experience with receiving grants from whatever agency or foundation that is giving the grant. Go find like an industry partner who's, more of an incumbent in your space, and have them be the applicant. Odds are they've gotten grant funding before, and you can partner with them as a subcontractor. And the cool thing about this is that now you don't have to write a grant application, they do. And they will take care of the administration for you. They'll manage all that stuff. And all you do is show up, do your thing, and get paid, and you get experience. So performance generally is something you want to develop over time. It's obviously like there's definitely programs that encourage first-time applicants. Sbir is the famous one that everyone knows about. So small business innovation research grants are great for like first-time applicants who've never gotten grants before, and that's another way to get performance. But when you look at the big grants, so like $90 million or like big infrastructure projects or big foundations, they often will ask for your past performance. And if you don't have that, the best way to go get it is to partner with somebody who does. And that's a perfectly legitimate way to go. It's a great way to go. And odds are it'll actually serve you really well, because you'll develop some skills and someone else will get some money and they'll expose themselves to the risk and you won't have to. And you can kind of find out, the things that you want to do and the things you don't want to do in that grant space. So performance is huge. And then finally, and this one is kind of obvious, but also one that people struggle with, is like the communication aspect. And obviously, when you submit a grant application, you're communicating something. But frequently, many grant applications will require some kind of reports. So they'll be quarterly, or they might be reports that are due every month. You want to get really good, just like you would do investor updates. You want to get really good about communicating and managing that relationship with your grantor, because for a few reasons. But one is that you're going to probably get into some problems down the road. No project, right? No plan ever survives first contact with the enemy, they say. And that's very true for your grant application. So down the road, you're probably going to run into some hiccups. And you're going to want to have your partner, your grantor, on your side for a bunch of reasons. But chances are if you're getting a grant, you're smaller, and the person giving you grants is usually really big and usually has a lot of resources, including more money, but also network, clout, PR, all kinds of really great tools. And so you want to think of that grant as a partnership. You want to think of that contract that you're going to have as a partnership, and you want to do everything you can to just like be that person's friend, and do what you need to do. But also, when things go wrong, you want to be able to call them up and say, hey, we need help. We're like we're almost there, but we need $1 million more. That's an ask, and it's something that they can usually help you with, as it turns out. But if you haven't done a good job of communicating and managing expectations, then it's going to be really problematic trying to get that $1 million. So these are the kind of things that you want to be like. These are the values that you want to kind of undergird that process that I just talked about, because these are the things that are going to really unlock being successful with grant funding. So that's another framework. And then I want to, before I open it up for questions, I just want to like briefly touch on these kind of steps or resources to making these connections. So, I know that it can be really hard to like get into this space, especially if you don't have a network. And I recognize like my background in consulting and stuff gave me this really incredible network that not everyone has. But there are some really great resources out here that are available to everyone that will give you kind of the tools you need to make those connections, to network into these agencies, to do more discovery, and to start to really flex your muscles in this space. The first one on the federal side, if you're going after grant funding from the state or federal government or even local government, your PTACs, those are Procurement Technical Assistance Centers. These are groups that are funded by the federal government. So it's free, it's a free resource. They're highly qualified, highly capable, and they will help you go out and secure government contracts as well as SBIR grant funding. They don't help as much with other kinds of grants, but if you're an early stage startup and you're looking for between $250,000 and $1 million in non-dilutive grant funding, the PTACs are a great place to start. Now, there's other resources out there. OpenGrants is one where you can go find consultants who will work with you and they'll charge you money and they'll help you through this process. But if you're an entrepreneur and you're bootstrapping or you're just trying to stay super lean, PTACs are a great way to go. And I actually funded my first company using the SBDC and the PTACs to help me get grant funding and get contracts and things. And we're lucky enough to exit that company. So it's a real resource. It's free, which is amazing. And they're really underutilized. So reach out, get connected. They're a great place to start making those connections. The other place that you want to look is your advisors. If you don't have advisors, check out the mentor tool. Reach out to just people in your network. If you don't have a network, once again, the mentor tool is a great spot. You can ping me on LinkedIn or Twitter, like reach out to people that you have some kind of connection or communication with and ask them, see what their network is like and see if they can help you make those connections. You want to there's a lot of just getting really good at asking and building an intro here. There's also the opportunity on the government side in particular to attend public meetings. There are for any grant, there's typically like a public comment period. Because it's public money, there's meetings that can be held, and you can go to those meetings and develop a really nice, develop a few questions, speak up, have your voice heard. Frequently when you go to those meetings, the interesting thing is you have an opportunity not only you can speak up and say, hey, I am, my name is Sedale Turbovsky from OpenGrants. We're the easy way to win grant funding, and we're here to sell infrastructure for, the future of grant funding. Like that's a sentence you can say in a room full of people who are interested in buying your product. So at a public meeting, you're actually kind of required to disclose that information. The other thing about public meetings, and this is one to throw out there if you're looking to contract or partner with someone who might have more experience, is that public meetings, the public agency has to take record of everyone who attended and their contact information typically. And what we used to do, like when I was a consultant, we would go to public meetings and we would stand outside because at that time they just took like the roll on just like a sheet of paper outside the meeting, and maybe they still do that. But we would just stand out there and we'd pull out our cell phones and we'd take pictures of everyone's info that had signed up, and then we would go back to our office and we would email all of them, and that's how we would get clients. So public meetings, lots of good public information, lots of opportunities to network and connect with people. And now, lots of those meetings might be hybrid or done via Zoom. So it might even be more accessible where you'll be able to request like a spreadsheet of everyone who attended. And finally, the other one that I'll just throw out there is, call people. Their information's out there in the world. Reach out, call them. It kind of like knocks them off their toes a little bit because people don't make phone calls anymore. And so definitely reach out and have that discussion. Roll in with that, like, how can we help? We saw this grant thing. We want to help. How can we be helpful? Start there, offer value, and it'll take you a long way. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up to some questions because I see some stacking up there, and we'll go from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sedale. Super helpful. I know this is a very complicated world, but thanks to some of your advice and some of your resources, I think that people will be able to locate more opportunities for this. And a bunch of people are asking how to find PTACs. I've got a find a PTAC link right there and there. Before we jump into Q&A, I'm going to launch a quick poll. Just let us know what's keeping you up at night. So we're here to talk about grants, but what are some of the other areas that you'd like to learn over the next coming months? We use this data to inform the next series of courses that we're going to be doing. So thank you for participating in that. For those of you who haven't dropped a question in, if you still have one, drop it into the Q&A box at the bottom. We've got a ton and some time to take care of them. So thank you so much for participating in that. Looks like finance, no surprise there, is at the top of the list. All right, Sedale, let's see. We've got a question from Rachel Miller. I'm currently researching applying for SBIR proposals. Are there grant writers that work on payment upon award, or are there a standard typical fees? Right now, they can't afford much, but very interested in securing funding through grants.
Yes, this is a great question. So I'll say two things. One is there are grant writers who work upon like securing funds. In our experience, those grant writers are not great because they're working on more of like an arbitrage kind of model where they're just doing as many as they can and then hoping that a few stick. So I would caution against those folks. Typically, you'll find grant writers who charge by the hour. They're a little more professional and they do a better job because they're actually focused on your project. So I'll just throw that out there. The other thing I'll say is the PTAC's great resource. You can reach out to them, get connected, and they will not physically write your grant application, but they will do literally everything else for you. And they'll walk you through the process. They'll help you get set up in all the different systems and get registered where you need to be registered. They'll review your work. They'll give you templates to work from, all kinds of really great resources from the PTAC. So if you're bootstrapping along, that's a great way to go.
Awesome. Super helpful. All right, another question here. When you talked about outreach a bit earlier, somebody's asking, do they not get inundated with emails on, hey, do you think this is a good fit for you, etc.?
They do, some of them. You'll find that, the really famous like Sbir, obviously just swamped all the time. But if you like take a couple side steps from, the Sbir and you're looking at, a grant for, say you're working on energy and you go to the California Energy Commission, smaller agency, smaller scope, better reception. Also good agencies that, it depends really is the answer, but there's a lot of places where you can be competitive. So, you think about like USDA, people don't think about USDA very often, but they have tons of funding for all kinds of innovation. And maybe that's a fit, so it just depends, but the best way to like get over like the email thing, just follow up. Eventually they get back to you. I've sent 10 emails to USAID so far. I got a response finally today. So, it takes time.
Persistence often pays off. Question right here from William. Thanks for the question. Are there grants to help you create and or publish scientific papers? Yeah,
I mean, that's what Sbir is for, frankly. That phase one is all about research, getting that initial information done. So Sbir is a great place. And then when you think about like the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health, like these are agencies that fund research. So any of the research focused agencies, you might find grants for writing papers and publishing papers.
Love it. Another question from William. Anything developed by a government grant like DARPA, can the government use it for free?
This is a really great question. And I will say this, I'm not an attorney and you should ask your attorney. I will say that most of these programs don't offer the government rights to your IP. However, I know specifically of some programs that give the government walk-in rights to your IP. So you want to be cautious of that and have your attorney, like, I'll say two things here. One is don't be afraid about submitting a proposal. Obviously, don't include confidential information in your proposal, but don't be afraid to submit a proposal. Once you get the award itself, you're going to go into what's called a contracting phase, where you're actually going to sign an agreement. Have your attorney review that agreement in a really detailed way, and they will alert you to any kind of threats to your IP if there are any.
That's super helpful. Yeah, read the fine print and have a lawyer do it, because I'm definitely not one. Let's see, what does the post-funding relationship with a grantor look like? Since they don't have equity, do they have decision-making power or even influence? Do they advise?
That's a great question. It really depends on the agency, but generally speaking, high level, no, they don't really have any kind of like, they don't really have any decision-making opportunities. They will provide advice, and advise on things, which can be really useful for you. Especially if you're working with a big agency with a lot of influence and maybe you're helping them understand things so they can put better regulatory frameworks in place, or maybe you're helping a foundation understand how to improve their grant programs. So it's a good relationship, but they certainly don't have, and this is a problem, right? And it's one of the reasons they're cautious. Like at the end, if they've given you the money, there's not a whole lot they can do to recall the money. So
Yeah. Can you please talk a little bit more about partnering with the lead applicant? Are people open to getting a subcontractor generally?
Yeah, not only are they open to it, frequently this is like a boon for them, right? So, many of the bigger organizations out there may be a requirement that when they receive funding, they work with a small business or they work with a new innovative business, or they may just not have the capacity to be innovative themselves. It's a real struggle for large companies. So working with them can really be, it can be super mutually beneficial. And it's something that we've never encountered. Like if it's a good idea and it's a good fit, we've never encountered a problem like helping people partner with a larger company to go after a grant. Or, and I want to include, like, it's not just companies. Like you could partner with your local government, you could partner with a local nonprofit. There's really cool funding out there right now because of Build Back Better and all that kind of COVID relief for all kinds of innovation for small businesses and Main Street in particular. And they're actively, like, we had a meeting where my team is having a meeting with the chamber in our local city right now, talking about how we can partner with them to help deploy grant funding because they need it. And so, yeah, this is an active need, especially right now for governments and for local governments in particular.
That's great news. So I guess a general question here, how long does it take to get qualified? Like, what's the whole process from end to end, generally speaking?
Yeah, you're looking at, generally speaking, 6 months potentially. It can be a lot quicker, but generally speaking, government moves slower. So on the government side, 6 months to a year. On the foundation side, 3 to 6 months. Those are kind of typical timeframes you can expect to like participate. And then, from like getting awarded to getting money in the bank, that can be as quick as a month, but it can be as long as 6 months as well. So, grant funding is really great strategic money. It is not really great if you need cash to make payroll like next week. Like that's not what this is for.
Love it. Does one's personal financial situation, credit score, or team's background matter to the grantor?
Only in certain cases. They're not like looking at your credit score or like the money you have in the bank typically. Although some grants do require match funding, so you might have to assert or show that you have funding to match the funding they're bringing on board. And you could actually bring that from an investor or someone else as well. But only in cases of like if you've been convicted of like certain felonies, or if you're on some kind of watch list or sanctions list, then you might have a problem. But generally speaking, no, they're not ever looking at your like credit score or anything like that.
That's helpful. Let's see, tons of great questions. Keep them coming in. For a R01 grant, how much average do grant writers charge per hour?
Oh, this is a great question and really specific. Generally speaking, you'll find like there's a couple of groups there. There's like grad students who are doing it kind of on the cheap, so maybe 80 to $100 an hour. And then there's like research professionals who do it all the time, and they're probably charging anywhere from like 125 to 280 at the high end. And these are like, you're pulling like a deeply technical PhD in, they're going to charge a lot for those kinds of grants. But you can usually find grad students and other freelancers who will do it for anywhere between 80 and 120, I'd say, is an hourly rate that's typical.
Yeah. Let's see, on the nonprofit side across the board, grant writers like to see a certain ratio of spending on programmatic fees versus administrative fees. Does the same hold for grant for business, not nonprofits?
No, not really. I think one of the really kind of things about business is, typically if you're a business looking for a grant, you're applying for something super specific. So it's usually not a huge program, but more like, charging or, employee training. So they just want to see a budget that's realistic. Like capital costs are realistic, hourly rates are realistic. You will find, especially in the federal space and the state government, that they may even obligate you to use like a prevailing wage instead of what you might charge people. So you want to be aware of that.
Let's see, how common is it for a grant giver to request a seat on the board?
That should never happen. I don't. Yeah.
Well, I hope that if that was a reality, that it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Let's see. Does your business need to be certified before working with a PTAC?
I'm not sure what you mean by certified, but I'm going to go ahead and assume that you mean like registered with an EIN. No, you can sign up for. So the PTACs usually are like either adjacent to or work with an SBDC, and they can help you with all that stuff. In fact, but yeah, you can just register as a person and get going there.
That's great. Let's see. Are there grants that allow you to keep your IP secret?
Interesting question. I'd say you're not like in an application, you're not disclosing anything, but over the course of a grant, you're definitely developing IP. It's not going to be secret. It will be owned by you though, which is, I would argue, the more important thing. So yeah, I mean, frequently, especially for research and development grants, they're going to want reports. They're going to want, proof of progress and that kind of thing. But you're not having to like disclose like your core IP necessarily, as long as you're reporting and showing that you've progressed. So I guess the real question here is like, there's a ton of really good. We actually did a webinar a while back, and I can maybe provide this to Colin and the team about like all of this. And we had an attorney come on and talk specifically about it. And they're much more of an expert. I guess my short answer is I don't know how to answer this very well, and I will get some resources that are much better for y'all.
Sounds great. Let's see. Oh, there was a pre-submitted question, and then there's one live here that's on this. So can you have an SBIR and Sdtr at the same time for similar projects?
Generally speaking, no. If it's the same research, then that actually can get you in a lot of trouble, because they'll look at it as double dipping. However, I guess if it's like adjacent, so like maybe you're doing like a drug therapy, or you're working on something in robotics or like hard tech of some kind, and they're like parallel kinds of research, but on different things, maybe. But generally speaking, if you're doing the same research with two different grants, the federal government looks very poorly on that, and you'll get in a lot of trouble.
And on a similar thread to that, can you apply for multiple grants for the same project?
Yes, but it has to be different sort of things. So a great example is we have a partner that we support that has a cool innovation center, and they've gotten grants for workforce development, and they've also gotten grants for equipment and build out of their facility itself, and they've gotten grants to kind of market and communicate the mission that they're on. So these are all different grants, and they are all for the same project, but they're for different things within that project. So that's the way that you should go about that.
Yep, and avoid double dipping. Good advice there. Let's see. What repercussions can a business or nonprofit expect if they don't meet the grant requirements post-funding?
Yeah, great question. So there's two things to note here. Like everyone in the world realizes that people are people, and the world is the world, and things are imperfect. And this goes back to my communication comment. Like if you made a good effort, but like things didn't work out, that's a whole different thing than like, oh, we spent the money on a cruise and we didn't do any work. So if it's fraud and gross negligence, then you can expect a lot of consequences, including being like blackballed from ever getting a grant ever again, or for like a period of 10 years or 5 years or something like that. However, if you like got a grant to do some research, and the upshot of your research was, oh, this thing that we were building doesn't work, there's no way to make it work, the technical challenges were too much, that is like, then you just have a communication thing to deal with, which is, hey, we used the money, we did the research, and these are the results. That's totally acceptable, because everyone realizes that like this was a really challenging thing that you were trying to do. So it depends on the reason for the failure and like how that came about. But in any case, you should be in communication with your grantor about the ongoing progress. And if a problem comes up, you should let them know.
Yeah, that's great advice. Is there a particular amount of revenue that you need to generate before seeking grants?
No, you can get a grant with no revenue and no experience and nothing. That's what SBIR, in fact, and many other programs are all about, is like getting you started on that path of whatever you're trying to accomplish.
Awesome. Any advice around finding a lead applicant?
Well, the meetings, as I mentioned earlier, that's a great way to go. So go to the meeting about the funding opportunity, whether that be a call or an in-person event, and look for the big dogs in the room, right? Like the big companies, and reach out to them. You can also, some agencies will post what they call teaming lists, and you can look at those where people will sign up, and you'll see like everyone from the Navy to like, big corporates who are signing up to team up with, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes they need a small business to go in and be able to put in the application in the first place. So they may need you. And so you can use those teaming lists that the agencies put out.
Awesome. We got a bunch of questions here, and I'm sure this is going to be an easy one for you. A bunch of people are asking for where can they find a database of grant writers? Yeah,
you can go to opengrants.io. You can sign up for free, and you can talk to now over 143 different grant writers whose expertise ranges from nonprofits to SBIR to big infrastructure projects and anything in between. And we have about 80 more that we're currently onboarding. So whether you be a city, a state government, a nonprofit, a startup, you can find experts at opengrants.io.
Awesome. Do you recommend getting an 8A certification?
That's more for government contracting. And it's certainly, if you qualify, it can be a great way to like get on some GSA contracts and set yourself apart and get access to a lot of financial opportunities. For grants, it's not as important, but for government contracting in general, super useful. So I'd say generally speaking, yes.
Love it. Can you use a grant to finish or verify the findings of your research?
Yeah, it really depends, but sure.
Let's see. We're still getting questions around grant writers, compensation. Can grant writers be retroactively compensated from the grant proceeds?
Typically, no. There's actual federal regulation that says a hard no on that. Some foundations might allow it, and what you can pay grant writers for out of the grant is grant management, which can be super useful, and you should think about doing that. So you can't usually pay for things that happened before the grant was awarded with grant money. So like grants typically are not retroactive. And of course, so that's a thing. People skirt around it all the time. I don't recommend it, but there's ways to go about that. But one thing you should think about is all of the reporting. Like you're probably gonna have to write a final report. You're gonna have to submit reports. You're gonna have to submit budget requests, all kinds of different things. You can budget into your proposal the grant writer or grant writing team that helped you to do grant management work. And then you can take that whole administrative burden off of yourselves as entrepreneurs, which is a really great thing to do. Highly recommend that.
No, yeah, that's a great tip. Let's see. Do you see a lot of grants on the professional services side, particularly for a solo entrepreneur looking to expand their practice?
Good question. There are like technical assistance grants where a city can get funding from someone like the EDA to help them do economic strategy, or there's communications grants where you can get funding to manage your kind of science communication, things like that. So yeah, there's kind of really specific use cases for that. We talk about frequently grants as sales enablement for entrepreneurs, where if you're interested in going and helping some group accomplish something as a consultant, they can find budget in a grant to pay for you. So that's a very common use case. And one of the neat things is if you're a consultant and you're not charging crazy amounts, and by that I mean you're like under 100K, you can even walk into a funded grant project and get them to pay you out of that grant to do whatever it is that you do. So yes, there's funding for professional services in many grants, because especially for like specialized consultants. So if you're an architect or you're a professional engineer, someone with like a PE, or if you just like do advanced mathematics or something really specialized, then yeah.
Great. We had a couple of questions come in around lab equipment purchases, and they're saying, where can we find them? or grants, and they know that many federal grants don't allow it.
Yeah, that's a great point. So yeah, you can you can go to OpenGrants and search for lab equipment, and maybe you'll find some stuff. You can also look at what other people have used in the past. But yeah, there's grants that are specific for equipment through SBIR. You can like do capital purchases of equipment specifically. But yeah, there's some large federal grants that are just for programs. So you want to maybe talk to a consultant, dive in. Honestly, like I wish my answers were more specific, but it depends, right? There's opportunities to buy equipment, and there's opportunities to do other things, and you just have to sift through it all and figure out what fits.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to do a plug that your website is definitely the easiest one that I've seen to find and get through all those crazy lists of grants out there.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Let's see. We're almost at time, so we might not be able to get to all these questions, but I think we've addressed many of them here. Let's see. One last one. You mentioned grants for very specific capital costs. What about if they'd like funding for a specific hire needed to scale the business? Yeah,
that's a great way. You have to think creatively about it though, right? So I want to give an example. We use and this isn't necessarily a grant, but it's a government program. We use the DoD Skill Bridge program to hire transitioning veterans to come in and do specific work at OpenGrants. It's a great way. The DoD pays for 6 months of labor, and we get highly specialized, incredibly trained people who are coming out of the military, and their last duty station happens to be at our company. That's a really specific program. California has a workforce development fund that's specifically for training new employees, and that's a grant program. So yeah, you want to get really specific. There's some specific programs, and the best way to do that is like get really clear on what that person is and what their role is, and then go search for some funding.
That's awesome. Well, Sedale, we just did almost 40 minutes of jam-packed grant-related non-dilutive funding content, and I know that I learned a bunch, and I hope everyone else in attendance learned a ton too. If you are going to give one takeaway for everybody in attendance today, what would that one be?
I think one of the things that I know as an entrepreneur is I used to try to do a lot of things myself and didn't use consultants as liberally or other team members as liberally as I do now. If this is like your thing and you're good at it, then go for it. But there's a lot of really great people out there who can help you with this stuff. So reach out, connect with somebody. We have a ton of people you can connect with for free on the OpenGrants platform. Talk to somebody and ask them to help you get started, because just a little push down this path will get you a long way. So I'd say, ask for help. That's great. Well, Sedale, thank you so much. I know we could spend so much more time on this topic, but I really appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom with our community, and what you're doing is awesome. So I appreciate you coming back to the platform and sharing your wisdom. For everyone still on, we hope you can join us for upcoming webinars. So keep a lookout in the chat and a follow-up for that. But to all of you online, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you back soon. Thanks again, Sedale. All right. Thank you all.